Hey everybody, Ash here with Gents, and so I'm back with another rotation video. This one, honestly, doesn't really have much of a theme. The last 4 or so have been themed rotations. This one was more so just things that I haven't reached for in a long time. So I guess if you want it to be themed, that would be the theme. Stuff that I haven't worn for a long time. And some of this is stuff that I actually really like, and a couple of these are ones that I wore a ton in the past. I just haven't worn them recently, and I wanted to kind of revisit them. So here we go, guys. 7 days, 7 fragrances, stuff I haven't reached for recently. First up is the 19th. I went with a Varvados fragrance. I've talked about John Varvados a lot in the past. Most of their fragrances are very high quality. Usually the sticking point is the performance. The one that I went with on the 19th is this one, John Varvados Oud. If you look at the note lineup in this fragrance, it's a killer lineup. Oud, incense, tobacco, rose, myrrh, cinnamon, leather. There's a lot of stuff in here that's really nice, at least as far as notes go. So when this was actually announced and released, it was one of the fragrances, like top fragrances, that I wanted to smell at the time. It does get hated on for bad performance, and like I just talked about, that's a knock on this house in general. For me, the performance is average, maybe slightly below average, so it's definitely not great. It's not a powerhouse oud fragrance. It's not one that's gonna choke people out. It's not one that's gonna last 12 plus hours. The oud in this fragrance is not barnyard or funky or fecal or animalic or all the other, descriptors that are used for oud so often. It's really not all that prominent. It's not in your face. It's more subdued. It's a little bit sweet, but really, it's not the star of the fragrance. You mainly get a bunch of spices and resins with the rose and a bit of incense. That oud note is a little more noticeable in the opening through to the mid, but once it starts to settle into the dry down, it's definitely a background player. In the full dry down, it's mainly that rose, spice, myrrh, and amber. Quality on this fragrance, in my opinion, is quite good, like most all John Varvados fragrances. When this first came out though, it was definitely overpriced. The quality is good, like I just said, but when this first came out, it was $150. No offense to John Varvados, but this is not $150 good. Price-wise, where it's at discounters now makes a lot more sense. You can pick it up in the $50 range. At its heart, this really is just a spicy, sweet rose and oud combo with resins, which is kind of standard, but it does it really well. And the bottle looks really nice too, though this is plastic. If this were metal, it would look much more high quality and higher class. But sitting on a shelf, it still does look really good. So there we go on the 19th, Varvados Oud. It's gonna take me to January 20th. You just saw what it was. It's this Boss Bottled Intense. And this is the Eau de Parfum. There's also an Eau de Toilette with Boss Bottled Intense. Now this fragrance is very strange to me. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just when I smell it, it reminds me of my childhood for some reason. Not even a particular place or time necessarily. Maybe my grandparents on my dad's side. It's hard for me to explain. It's like when I smell it, some long unfired synapses in my brain go off and it kind of brings me back. It doesn't smell dated per se. It just reminds me maybe of like Christmas and my grandparents. And this isn't necessarily what I would call a Christmas fragrance. It's not one that would get lumped in like that you solely use around that time of year. But I would say it would be a very good holiday fragrance. Just the composition and makeup of this one really kind of lends itself to that kind of environment. Cinnamon, apple, vanilla, and clove are some of the notes here. Now the original Boss Bottled always gets talked about as an apple pie type fragrance, smelling like an apple pie. And this one to me does not come across as apple pie like as the original does. The vanilla cinnamon apple combo here comes across probably a lot like you would expect, really warm, inviting, cozy, and sumptuous smelling. It's just really comforting and comfortable to wear. I would call this more of an alluring fragrance than a sexy fragrance. It's the type of scent that's gonna have people drawn into you. It's very easy to wear. It's not the type of fragrance that you spray on and you have to worry you're going to offend somebody. Very pleasant. And to me, this is definitely more modern smelling than the original, which makes sense because it is a newer fragrance than the original is. It's warm, spicy, and sweet for pretty much the whole way through. It's going to be a great reach for cool and cold weather. And nowadays you can get this for cheap from discounters, which is a big positive. Basically, if you like cinnamon, vanilla, and apple in any kind of combination, you should definitely check that one out. In my opinion, much more wearable nowadays than the original Boss Bottled is. And I realize Boss Bottled is a classic at this point, but between the two, I would wear this over that 10 times out of 10. Honestly, to me, it smells freaking great, and at the price tag, can't go wrong. It's gonna take me to the 21st. I wore a Creed, not a Ventus though. Like I said, no Ventus this year. And this is a fragrance that really is not necessarily a cool weather fragrance. Actually, most people would say that this is a spring and summer fragrance, but I never really get too roped in to specific seasons, that you can only wear a fragrance during a specific season. I've said in the past, you can wear whatever you want, whenever you want, just taper the sprays up or down depending on the situation. So on the 21st, I reached for this one, Silver Mountain Water. And for those interested, my bottle here is from 2014. Now, off my skin, Silver Mountain Water is actually a really powerful fragrance. It projects very strongly and lasts for a very long time. So it easily cuts through the cold weather on me. And honestly, I have to really pay attention to how much I spray this on, because there were times in the past that I wore this to the office and legitimately choked people out, which is an uncomfortable feeling. When people, 8 feet away from you start coughing and start remarking that somebody has something on that's too strong and that they can't breathe. Not a great feeling. Less is more sometimes. And honestly, I prefer to not wear this in the high heat. Spring and fall, yeah, that's fine. Where it's cool or mild out, works great. Even cold weather works great. Really, really hot weather though, I'll reach for something different. Green tea, black currant, musk, and citrus are the main notes here. This has been described a number of ways. The most accepted way of describing it is that it has an inky, metallic feel, especially in the opening to the mid. I would also say that it's sharp, brisk, and very, very fresh. And the DNA of Silver Mountain Water has been copied over and over and over and over and over. On the more expensive side, you have fragrances like Mephisto by Xerjov, you have Wild Fruits by Mancera, you have Hamptons by Bond No. 9, and on the cheaper side of things, you have L'Aventure Blanche by Al Haramain, you have Derby Clubhouse Blanche by Armaf, you have Al Rahab Silver, Rasasi Al Bassam Day, and more. It's been copied over and over again. This may not be for everybody, but worn properly, it's an invigorating, green, uplifting, fresh, brisk fragrance that can work in many, many situations. All right, that's gonna take me to the 22nd. This is a fragrance that actually, when it was new, I wore a bunch. I consistently wore this, especially to the office. It is Dolce & Gabbana Intenso. Now, this fragrance and the next fragrance that I'm gonna talk about have caught a lot of hate. For whatever reason, Intenso just is not looked upon very favorably. Now, like I just said, this fragrance I actually wore a ton when it first came out. To the office especially. This was almost a daily wear for a while. I also really enjoyed wearing it when I wore it to the office nearly every day, and I caught compliments from it as well. Part of the reason I think this caught a lot of hate is, first off, the name and bottle and the note breakdown. When you look at all three of those combined, you would probably think that this is going to be a very deep, rich fragrance, because tobacco is one of the main notes here. So you look at this bottle, the name, the fact that tobacco is in it, and you go, oh, okay, Intenso. It's going to be some new, powerful, rich tobacco fragrance that Dolce & Gabbana put out. And people in general, especially in the fragrance community, seem to really like fragrances like that. Thing is, that's not what Intenso is. It's more a fresh, soapy kind of fragrance that has a strong similarity to the original Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme. It utilizes lavender and hay, a decent amount of each one of those, to give it kind of a soapy feel with a green vibe. It's more spicy and fresh than it is dark and rich. So I feel like the strong similarity to the original Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme is the reason that this caught a lot of hate. But a lot of people out there that have the vintage Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme, which is much more sought after than the current formulations of Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme, say that Intenso is much closer to those vintage Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme bottles, that it smells very similar. And we'll talk about this on the next fragrance as well, but it's kind of strange that this would have a strong similarity to a vintage fragrance that people in general say is a classic, a fantastic release, but then this one gets crapped on, even though it's very similar to it. And to be honest with you guys, I would wear Intenso over Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme, the current formulation, 10 times out of 10. Just like Boss Bottled Intense over the original Boss bottle. Intenso is basically just a better version of the current Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme. And this is another one that you can scoop up affordably, especially the 1.3 ounce 40 milliliter size bottle. You can pick that up for about 25 bucks nowadays. This one I feel is very overlooked. I think it's a solid fragrance. It just caught a lot of hate, I think because of the similarity to Dolce & Gabbana's Pour Homme. It's gonna take me to the 23rd. I wore another fragrance that is divisive. A lot of people hate this, but a good amount of people really enjoy this as well. It's from Jean-Paul Gaultier, possibly one of the least talked about from Jean-Paul Gaultier as far as male fragrances go. It is Kokorico. The bottle looks like a man's face, and then you turn it to the side and it is a torso. Now this one does have an opening that's a little bit harsh. It's gonna turn some people off for sure. You get blasted with a big hit of fig leaf off the top. To me though, it's tremendous. I don't think it's too harsh. I don't think it's too powerful. I actually like the opening. It sets it apart from other fragrances out there. After it settles in, you have a very prominent cocoa and patchouli combo. And that's gonna be the most prominent thing that you smell from this fragrance from the mid to the dry down. That cocoa patchouli, that's what you're gonna remember most, as long as you make it past that opening. It's earthy, dry, sweet, a little bit bitter, a little bit woody, and slightly green as well. Now, Kokorico has more than a passing similarity to Guerlain, L'Instant de Guerlain, Eau Extreme. There are some definite strong similarities between the two once you hit the dry down. And what's strange is that Guerlain is regarded as a complete masterpiece, while Kokorico catches a good amount of hate. Now, I'm not saying they're on the exact same level. I'm not saying that they're just as good as one another. I'm saying there's a strong similarity, and one fragrance gets praised and the other gets crapped on. To me, it's probably because of the opening of this one. The opening to Kokorico is much more divisive than the opening to the Guerlain. I like both the fragrances. I mean, honestly, if I were going to pick just one, I would pick the Guerlain, but Kokorico is a solid buy if you like cocoa patchouli mixes. And Kokorico is also an inexpensive fragrance to pick up, quite cheap. So that's another big positive, because L'Instant de Guerlain Eau Extreme, especially if we're talking the vintage bottles, is gonna cost you 5, 6, 7 times as much as this will. So on the 23rd, Jean-Paul Gaultier, Kokorico. We're in the home stretch. 24th. I wore Parfums de Marly fragrance, probably one of their least talked about of their entire line. It is this one, Byerley. Now I do get why this one doesn't really get talked about. It doesn't have that wow factor that a lot of Parfums de Marly fragrances have. Now some of you more niche heavy guys out there might think that Parfums de Marly doesn't have a lot of wow factor fragrances in general, but I can tell you for the vast majority of people, when they smell a Parfums de Marly, especially one of their more people-pleasing, mass-appealing type of fragrances, it really hits them. You know, it really grabs their attention. Byerley, not as much. It does have a very basic note breakdown, and that should give you some idea of how it smells just from the note breakdown. The top is bergamot and cardamom. That's it. It has much more cardamom than it does bergamot. The mid is cedar and gaiac wood, and those are pretty evenly mixed. And the base is vetiver and resins, and has more vetiver than it does resins. This fragrance has a smoky, earthy, woody feel. It's definitely a masculine fragrance, and it comes across very refined and classy. It's also a very safe fragrance. Even though it does have kind of a smoky feel, 100% safe. This is gonna be for you guys out there looking for a woody, classy, office-safe fragrance that want kind of a semi-smoky feel with vetiver, gaiac, and cedar mixed all together. The cardamom here also does provide just a touch of sweetness and the smallest amount of spice to try to counterbalance all those woods. Byerley is a good fragrance, no doubt about that, but it is not what I would call a great fragrance. It's largely a forgotten Parfums de Marly, and honestly, it's probably always going to stay a forgotten Parfums de Marly. A lot of that is due to the price. When you're paying this much for a fragrance, which retail, this is $290, I believe, and at discounters, you could probably scoop it up for in the $140 range. At that price, people want something that's either going to wow them artistically and is going to set them apart from the crowd, or they want something that has very high quality of ingredients that smells better than your typical designer, at least again as far as the ingredients or composition or blend goes, that's still going to pull them compliments. That's why they're spending that money. And this does neither of those things. It has good quality, It has a decent compliment factor, but not an amazing one. Definitely nothing artistic going on here. It just doesn't excel in anything. It's good at a bunch of things, great at nothing. Probably something that I would say is 6.5 out of 10 or 7 out of 10. So 24th, Parfums Marley Byerley, good, not great. Last day of the week for this lineup, the 25th. Warren Eccentric Molecules fragrance. This is my favorite Eccentric Molecules fragrance. Talked about this a couple times in the past. It's Molecule 2. I do have a couple bottles of this. If you can find these as testers on discounters, they're usually heavily discounted. I've picked them up before in the $45 range, but often when testers pop up at discounters, they sell out pretty quickly. So notes for that one, Ambroxan, that's it. Just like Molecule 1, the only note there, ISO E Super. Technically ISO Gamma Super, but whatever. Now Molecule 1 is the fragrance that always gets talked about from this line, but Molecule 2 I prefer over Molecule 1. Not that there's anything wrong with Molecule 1, I just think this one smells nicer. And just like Molecule 1, you can use this for layering purposes. If you want an Ambroxan boost to whatever you're wearing, just spray this on, layer it with that fragrance that you want to wear, and get that boost. It usually works out really well. Now the way that Eccentric Molecules describes this fragrance is a very pleasant, velvety, warm, and delightfully sweet, non-obtrusive scent. This may not come off powerfully to your nose, but usually people around you can pick it up much better than you can. Same with Molecule 1 in that sense. It is also a potential compliment getter. People really do like the way it smells, even just on its own. This does last for a very long time though. It can fool you. You can think it's gone, but it's still there. This easily lasts through the entire workday with no issues for me. It's extremely pleasing, extremely easy to wear. You can wear that in literally any situation. It's simple, absolutely, completely simple. But does it work and does it smell good? Yeah. And does it pull compliments? Yeah. One thing with this though, when you first spray Molecule 2 on, very initially, it smells 100% like rubbing alcohol. I mean 100% exactly like rubbing alcohol. You have to give it, 5 minutes to let it settle down. And even then, when you smell very closely, you may not pick it up that strongly, but it's there. It's doing its magic. Don't panic. To me, Molecule 2 is superior to Molecule 1 in every way. And that was the fragrance I used to wrap up the week, and yes, I wore it by itself. Alright guys, that does it for this week. I'm gonna put a poll up on my Facebook group and you guys can choose my next theme. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe. I will see you guys again next time.